Okay. We are ready to go, Cheryl. I'm excited for you to talk about this today. So thank you for being here on my monthly mastermind meeting. And we're excited to hear all about storytelling because I know how powerful it can be in marketing, and I know we all need to do it. And we all need to do it right, which is the key if we want to make it powerful and basically do what it needs to do. So welcome and thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, I just wanted to go on camera and just say hello, but I don't expect anybody else to turn their camera on because I'm going to turn mine off and just start the presentation. So adieu.
Yes, go ahead, and I'll stop sharing mine so that way it just shows your slides.
All right. So I do want to just note that we collaborated with Diane Sager from Marketeering on this presentation, and we did it at Directions with them. And then at the IT Alliance up in Canada, if any of you are part of that organization, with John Rivers. So this one is a trimmed down version because that was run as a workshop. And usually what we do during this presentation is we invite partners to tell us stories, their stories. So if you would like to share a story, Amy, if anybody would like to pop that in the chat.
Sure.
It does make it more interactive, but I think the other part of stories is we all have our own stories that we bring, right? And so it's important to hear from others. That's what, when you walk away from this, that's what you'll remember. You'll remember the story. So let me stop my video and just get going. So how to do it. So I'll be going through these various different sections, thinking about stories. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of where you can use this in the in your marketing, because I think that's really the whole point of this, is how do we tell them as part of explaining to customers and prospects who we are and what we do. So I'm going to kick off with a personal story, and this one relates to my niece. My niece is a chemistry student at the Imperial College of London, and she was born with a congenital birth defect where her left leg never formed properly. And so from the very first day she tried to stand, the bottom of her leg from her knee to her ankle would just spontaneously snap. So just, you know, mother found out when she was always cranky and crying that she had this issue. She spent her entire childhood going through various different surgeries, fixators on that leg, bone grafts, skin grafts, you name it, she went through it. And eventually at age 20, she said to her parents, enough, take this thing off. So 2 years ago, she went through a below-the-knee amputation and had her first prosthetic. And she was invited by an organization in the UK called the Richard Whitehead Foundation. And Richard Whitehead, he was born without any limbs, so he grew up with prosthetics. But he had partnered with Nissan, the motor corporation, to provide carbon fiber prosthetics to a handful of young students in the UK. And my niece was a recipient of one of those prosthetics. So for the first time in her life at age 20, she was learning how to run. She does CrossFit. She does burpees. And I am like, I have two good legs and I suck at burpees. But there she is with her prosthetic, doing her burpees, participating in CrossFit. So the point of the story is, you know, how does that really affect decision making? So I might at some point in my life decide I'm going to buy a new car. It might make me pause and think about, you know, maybe I should really look at Nissan and see what they have to offer me versus going down, you know, I always drive a Ford or whatever I might drive. So it's kind of that inflection point that might make me pause and go in a different direction. So that's why I start with that story. And really, it's the point of the whole presentation is, how do we tell our stories to make people stop and pause and reconsider us. So at its most fundamental point, we are marketing to people, and we're living in a world where we've been distracted by all kinds of AI and ChatGPT, and have you used it to write your latest blog, etc., etc. I think what we risk losing when we go down those rabbit holes is the point that we're marketing to people, and people want to be spoken to as people versus, we're just generating volumes of content and there's no personalization. And I think it's especially true in technology marketing, where these concepts can be really complex. So we're always trying to simplify what we do so our prospects can understand the benefit to them as an organization in terms of the technology we're trying to sell them. Secondly, our world is very divided right now, and telling stories can help drive a sense of community and connection. And we just, right here we are on a virtual meeting. I think what we crave are those connections, especially in a virtual world. Is, we get to know each other through those stories. So connections are very important. Third reason is, especially with complex sales and technology decisions, we really can appeal to a different part of an individual's brain. So in a recent Harvard Business Review, they shared research that shows that intuition plays a much larger role in complex purchasing decisions than rational thought does. So it provides us an avenue to tell stories in a way that appeals to people from an emotional point of view. And so that engagement of a different side of the brain has a bigger impact on us than if we just spew data at the prospects we're trying to reach. And we can all understand the hero of a story, the underdog, the heartbreak. We process and share those same feelings of elation, hope, and despair and anger. And so it gives us a much bigger opportunity to bring together a diverse set of people who are involved in that story, in that decision-making process, through the stories that we tell. Oops, I think I skipped one. So stories can also help solidify abstract concepts. For example, Apple. So we all know Apple sells phones, but do you go to the website? Do you hear any kind of phone jargon? No, they're talking more about how their products benefits the user. You can take video, you can take better pictures, you can make, you can FaceTime with other people on Apple devices, your texts, you can leave groups, etc., etc. So that's really where they focus. They don't focus on, wow, it says the latest silicon chip, and they might talk about the Gorilla Glass, but they don't lead with those. So really solidifying what could be a potentially complex concept. The stories can help break through any of the complexity that we might be experiencing. So I think one takeaway from this particular reason is, remember, people don't want to know how you make the watch. They just want to know what the time is. Simple, simple, simple. And then the last reason is that they remembered. They remembered much more frequently than facts. As I mentioned earlier, when you walk away from this presentation, you're probably going to remember more about the stories I told than any of the 5 reasons I gave you for why you should tell stories. So this one I get quite a lot, in terms of marketing, is what stories should you tell? I think all of us are familiar with the case studies, but this is much more than case studies. I often get challenged around, what should go on my About Us page? and how do I showcase my people, and what do I say about them? So I'm going to give you some pointers that you can put to work in your marketing. So probably many of you know that today's prospects are really shopping with their values in mind. So how responsible are you as an organization in maybe meeting carbon neutral goals? How ethical are you? What are your hiring practices? Are they diverse in many different ways? You know, it could be neurodiversity, it could be gender diversity, it could be racial diversity. So they're looking at how you showcasing your values, and what are you're trying to tell your prospects. So that's one place you can tell stories. And remember that your values are also your brand. You know, if you have a Glassdoor account, what are your employees saying about you on Glassdoor? If you're trying to hire new talent, it's more than likely that that new talent is going to be looking at external reviews of your organizations and what people are saying about you. So when it comes to your marketing, make sure that you're consistently asking your customers to review you in places where you can also monitor the review. Now, if your review is bad, it does happen, we do get bad reviews. What's important about that bad review is how you respond to it. So we all know that not every customer is a perfect fit for our organizations. You're going to get those customers that are just really difficult. And it's how you handle that difficulty that your prospects want to see, because not every implementation is going to be 100% smooth. So how do you overcome adversity? And that's a very important part of your brand. Is your company culture a positive work environment? What social issues are important to you? So all those pieces come to play when we talk about culture and values. So think about how you describe your culture. In fact, I just got off a call where I was kind of looking at this going, wow, these people are fuddy-duddies. And you know, we're in a very modern, dynamic digital world. The prospects that that are coming into our market are 20, 30-somethings who use a very different terminology. They probably look at me and think I'm a dinosaur. And I'm looking at those people saying, oh my gosh, you're fuddy-duddy. So I could probably learn something here myself. So it's really important about, you know, what are you trying to present and who your audience might be. And then how would that culture that you're trying to cultivate really benefit your employees and customers? So are they showing up in your communications? Are things being depicted properly in your About Us text? How are you writing your bios? And then how are you demonstrating that commitment? So, you know, if individuals in your company are very passionate about certain causes, that might be something you can showcase in their bios. Do you have volunteer programs? Do you support Give Big? All those kinds of things are items you should be showcasing around your culture and your values. Okay, employee stories. So this one sometimes clients can feel very protective around because they're very cautious about their employees potentially getting poached. So what I would do with this particular one is, you know, maybe you lead with the C-suite in your team. So they could be the ones that could start this whole process. You know, thinking about how do we consistently share similar information with that on a website. Starting off with a series of questions. So as the owner or partner in a business, maybe you're the one who starts, you're answering the 4 questions. So the employees in your organization can kind of understand what it is they can share and how they might answer questions. Showcasing certifications and attainments that they have and then praising them. You know, Janice just received her Microsoft Azure certifications, congratulations. You see some of that starting to show up on LinkedIn. And I would encourage you not to manufacture stuff. It's more important that you're really authentic, because that's really what your prospects are going to be looking for, is that authenticity. And which is another reason why I don't encourage you to try to run stuff like this through ChatGPT, because I think you do lose that authenticity. And then I think the other thing to remember here is that not every person in your organization is comfortable with having their picture on their website, with saying stuff about them. Some people, you just don't know what their story is. For example, maybe they've been a victim of a stalker. I mean, that is a real thing, whether it's on social media or outside of work. So being very careful as to how you would respect somebody's individuality, but at the same time showcase how you work together. So this particular site is an example of, believe it or not, I think it was a Windows 95 launch party. But you could do, company celebrations. It might be around the holidays or other efforts that you're doing where you can somewhat anonymize people in your company, but still portray what you're about. I've seen a lot of these on LinkedIn, for example, clients who might share team building exercises, group hikes, Friday afternoon bike rides. So those are the types of things you can share around your team. And then when it comes to these employee stories, the one company that I really like the way they executed their employee stories, they are called the Answer Company. They are out of Vancouver, British Columbia. And they have a pretty big team. I think they are maybe Sage and Acumatica resellers. My knowledge might be a little old, but what I really liked about their company page is, and I think it's all black and white pictures, so there was no color, some men in suits, somebody who was vision impaired, he had a different picture. Those who were not comfortable with their pictures being on the website, they had a coffee mug. And then you hover over these pictures and they would flip over, and everybody had a very consistent way of articulating what they did with the company and who they were. And it was really showcasing the employees. And why I say this is really important is when you're going into a complex technology implementation, prospects want to know who they're working with. I want to know that maybe Amy is really good at conflict resolution, for example. And one of the stories I want to share with you from Directions, actually, this is what opened the whole thing, and it had us almost in tears. There was this gentleman who stood up and said, I really want to tell my story. And he came up to the top and he started with, my name is Joydale, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly, so I'm sorry, I apologize to him. But my name means is joy comes home. I was the youngest child. I think he's the youngest of 6. He has 5 older sisters, and his mother always wanted a boy. And so she gave him this name that meant joy comes home, because finally she got the boy she had always wanted. And this gentleman had been through a really horrific time in North Africa, where he was kidnapped, abused. I can't even, explain everything that happened to this gentleman, but he made his way over to the US, and he works for a Dynamics partner. And he stood up and he said, what I learned from that, what I took away from that is just persistence, tenacity, perseverance. And, now I don't know how much of that story he would be willing to share on his website. However, the takeaway was, when you're in these really complex environments and having to work with difficult customers, that's the person you want on your project, because they just don't give up. They keep going to the bitter end. And so sharing that type of information, I think, allows a prospect to see that this partner organization that they want to engage to do this implementation, they are just going to be there to hold your hand until that project is successfully concluded. And then this one, the processes. So everybody is like, oh my gosh, the process. But why is this process important? And why should it be included in your storytelling plans? So when prospects land on your website, they are going to make a pretty significant investment in some new technology. And what they want to know is really what they're going to expect. How should they prepare for this? How are we going to address challenges? How many times have you done this before? I hope I'm not going to be your first rodeo, because that would be a bad experience. So clearly outlining for prospects what they're going to expect through working with you delivers reassurance, and also let them know that there's going to be somewhat of a predictable outcome. Now, the important part of this process is always building in the change management, because we all know if you've ever built a house or remodeled your kitchen, there's always something that you're going to want to add or take away. So same here with technology, always making sure you're catering for that change management process. And so talking about stories around your discovery process gives you a couple of options here, and it's a great way to to include more of the individuals in your team. I call it kind of the back office people who hate being on camera, really smart people, right? But they just don't want to be at the forefront of everything, but they belong in this discovery process story, because they can help uncover gaps that customers are not thinking about. And it can literally save you thousands of dollars and hours of time by really identifying the gaps, eliminating the inefficiencies, the redundancies, or the errors that might cost you money. So it's not just costing you money as a partner organization if it's not properly scoped from the get-go, but could also help the customer kind of understand what they may be missing. And so, for example, they may be not thinking deeply enough about their inventory process, and that opens up an opportunity for the partner organization to perhaps bring in some additional software and implementation hours. And of course, let's talk about our customers. I think we're all probably mostly familiar with the good old-fashioned case study, and why do we do these things, right? So I would argue that your case study is probably your most important asset, because it allows prospects to really understand the outcomes of implementations that you've done. It helps build credibility, so you have referenceable accounts. They have a potential to increase revenue. So a prospect might come to your website thinking, well, they just need something basic, and it allows you to upsell based on what you did with previous clients. So thinking about add-ons, and it can often shorten the sales cycle. And I had seen this at play with a couple of my clients, where one of the first things that they share with prospects after the initial call is the case study, and often that can really get the customer to commit in much earlier in the sales cycle. And as you probably have experienced, a lot of customers don't want to do a case study. So how do we address that conundrum? And it happens all the time. You might have customers who are in public sector or legal or healthcare, and they don't want to publicly admit that they had an issue. For some customers, it could open up lawsuits, and so they just don't want to go there. The other thing I recently came across with a partner client, so they are heavily involved in the Microsoft 365 world and cybersecurity, and their customers don't want to be case study prospects, because they are afraid they might get hacked. And if they had a cybersecurity issue before, or they had some compromise with their cyber insurance audit, they don't want their name out there. So what do we do with these guys? So an anonymized case study can be a really powerful piece. It allows you as a partner or ISV organization to really talk about the problem in much more detail than the client would ever allow you to do. So, discussing the failures and challenges, how you address that, what kind of results you drove, and then use the quotes of the people from your team. And always write it on with the assumption that your customers are going to see that case study. Let's just face facts. They're smart. They're going to be on your website. They're going to see themselves there. So before you go ahead and publish it, make sure you share it with them so they know. They might say, we're really not comfortable with this. That's kind of up to you to break through the status quo with that customer. You need to think about your long-term relationships. It might be a piece that you don't put on your website, but you just share via, prospects or in a webinar where you're not actually sharing the physical document, but you're talking about the story. So it is a really important part of your case study library, is this anonymized one. And of course, the fictional ones. So these are kind of fun, and I've seen them play out in various different ways. So you have 3 opportunities here. So IT Heroes is something we did for a client. It really built a comic book around a character. And so what you can use with this particular one could be, it might be your architect. So your architect could be the hero. You can talk about, the problems they're solving through an animated process. Mascots and avatars. So the ones that we see most commonly are the Target dog, the Energizer bunny, the Geico gecko. So you could always have an avatar, could be a superhero avatar, and then your real people characters. So, somebody in your company who might have helped a customer resolve a particularly difficult issue or a cybersecurity issue, you could really share that story, kind of like an adventure story. And a word of caution, if you do adopt this medium, is you really need to have a strong graphics team, somebody who can really pull it off, because it needs to be consistently and really well executed. So, I think you really need to think through this one pretty carefully, but it can certainly break through a lot of the noise that we see out there, certainly in social media, getting out of kind of the stock photo type environment into something that can be pretty transformational. So how do we tell compelling stories? Because I think that's often where we struggle. So something to think about. So stories usually keep the reader engaged and interested, always thinking, what's coming next, much like you would write a novel. They need to be believable. So they focus on really convincing the reader that their version of reality is real. That sounds crazy. The reader that their version of reality is there, and it makes it easy for them to trust and engage. And then they should be educational. So what you want to do is try to spark curiosity and try to make them relatable. So remind people of places they know, the audience, patterns that they might see around them if they're in distribution, stories about similar distribution type companies. And then just try to keep them really organized and memorable, whether it's through inspiration or scandal or humor. I think we probably have all seen kind of the horror stories of a couple of failed ERP implementations that I think hit the courts a few years ago. There were big lawsuits. And those are the types of things that get remembered. So, I mean, not that we want to always remember the bad. I mean, it's much better to remember the good.
And just to reiterate, well, talk about like stories when Southwest had all those issues during Christmas time.
Oh,
Oh
yeah,
goodness, and all the money they lost and all the flights that were messed up, and I'll never forget that.
yeah, and that will probably haunt them forever. But I guess, you know, if that were me, look at me, I'm not in airline marketing, but it's like, how do you change that? You know,
Yeah.
remember when we
Yep.
ditched you all on the side of the runway? Well, guess what? Look what we did to fix it, you know?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example, Amy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And this, you know, you probably know all of this, so it doesn't hurt to have reminders. It kind of reminds me of my high school days, and I went to high school in the last century, so long time ago. But it's the same thing, you know, who's your protagonist? So who are we really going to showcase here? What was the problem? And then how did we resolve it? Thinking about you always, and I laugh because my daughter's like this. She's like, Mom, I really don't understand when I write an essay. I have to do an introductory paragraph. Then I spend the body of the essay talking about that introductory paragraph, and I have to close it talking about the same paragraph. This is ridiculous. But there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, you know, the structure is important. And then the setting. So, you know, what is it distribution? Is it a type of distributor? You know, you can't just say distribution. It's much better to say medical equipment manufacturer or distributor or industrial supplies, etc. So be very specific about your setting. And then just a couple of reminders, do's and don'ts. Visuals are important. I think we probably all know by now, people don't like to read a lot of words. Somehow we've forgotten or lost the enjoyment of reading. So visuals are really powerful, but make them relevant to the focus area, right? You can't just slap any old visual in there. Know your audience. So audience is a lot of different things to all of us, but you need to, just with audience, also think about your demographic. So who you're talking to and what age group might they fall into. Be authentic, go deep. So the more detail, the better. That shows your expertise. Make sure it's useful too. So not just what are you trying to achieve out of it, but how are you trying to help that customer? You kind of want to give them enough information to give them a launch point to contact you. And then hopefully with all of these things we have to try to do, we still need to inspire imagination. And I would honestly say, Amy, that's not one of my skill sets. That's why we have great copywriters, because that's what they do. You don't want me writing your case study. So being in tech, we love our acronyms and our buzzwords. One of the biggest learnings one of our clients has is, you know, and this has become more and more common over the last couple of years. We just assume people know what ERP is. Well, guess what? They don't. They're like, I just want an accounting system, or I want a system that does this. That acronym just is falling on deaf ears. I think looking at your demographic and trying to assess where they are in their journey as a company and who you might be talking to will let you know whether you should go with ERP or enterprise resource planning or accounting software. So really, really important. Remember, this is not all about you. This is really about showcasing your customers, really leading with your customers doing the heavy work for you. And then just by the way, they happen to do it through XYZ companies. So make sure you also talk about the warts, you know, make your characters too perfect. Yeah, people won't believe you. Like everything was just great and we had a great outcome and the best client ever and the greatest consultant. I think we can all spot that a mile away. Another learning, you know, setting your call to action too hard. Think about, you're just dating the person. You may be going on a first date. You're not going to ask them to marry you on the first date. So, you need to kind of tease the prospect along. So make sure that your call to action is not too hard of a sell right out of the gate. Give them other opportunities to engage with you and explore your company. So how do we try to change this up a little bit? So, taking a leaf out of Apple's book, just try to think a little bit differently. Very few companies, especially in our ecosystem, think differently enough. In fact, a caller was on this morning, we were just talking about how everybody just starts to look the same. Whatever you might be focused on, whether it's payment automation, Microsoft, Sage, payroll, whatever that might look, you really need to think about how you can break through the noise. Everybody's kind of like, they just gloss past you. We have the ability to look at something for 5 seconds and then we're distracted and moving on. So, for example, I'm just going to use Apple once again. In the early days of Apple, they were just revered. And still today, we look at examples where people say, oh, I want my website to look like the Apple website. I'm like, oh, so you're going to put a screenshot on there with a whole bunch of white space? I mean, what does that do? So I think, we should learn from those environments and then figure out how it makes sense for us in the type of work that we do. And, a couple of examples for you are really thinking about comics. So the example on the right-hand side is a company that maybe some of you have heard about. They are Bamboom Cloud. So when they went to market, they adopted the panda. So the panda is the face all over their website, and they focus on the small business, so it kind of appeals to organizations that are maybe younger, have fun, up and coming businesses. And so they really, when I first bumped into them, their website was hot pink. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never seen an ERP partner with a hot pink website. So very, very memorable. Think about creating suspense. So in this particular example, it's from Guinness, the company that make the stout. So what they did in their marketing campaign is they had a video where everybody was playing, I think, wheelchair basketball, and it was followed by a pint of Guinness. When you see them with their pint of Guinness in the pub, there was only one person out of that team of men who were playing basketball in wheelchairs who was actually a wheelchair user. But they decided they all wanted to be in wheelchairs so they could play with their friend. And then at the end of the night, what did they do? Is they all went and had a Guinness. So the voiceover in that particular one was dedication, loyalty, friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character. So the inference there was the choice the men made to play basketball with their friend is a testament to their character, and so is the choice they make when they are at the beer taps. So that was the Guinness campaign. And then for us on this call, we live in this lovely ERP, complex technology type world. This particular example was an ABM campaign, account-based marketing, where they delivered cookies to their target list of customers, but in the box, they had printed on the box how these cookies got to the customer. So it was all about, the supply chain, logistics, and etc. that got that box of cookies to that customer. So it told the whole story about that implementation. So that was a little bit of a breakthrough campaign there. And, no reason why you can't make some of this interactive. This one will look a little bit silly, but, after being through Teams or Zoom, I guess, for the past couple of years, have a bit of fun with it as well. People love to interact with quizzes. And I think, Amy, if you want to talk now about how you have found that working for you on LinkedIn, over to you.
Sure. About how I use polls on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I incorporate different polls, not only marketing polls, but fun polls. So the latest one, and I feel like I do get a lot more responses when I do fun ones. So the latest one is, summer's almost here. What are you doing this summer? What are you going on vacation? And they can pick out of the country, staycation, a couple of different answers. And then they also like leave things in the comments. And we know how LinkedIn loves comments, and the more comments, the better it shows up. So it's nice to create a variety of different polls. Of course, you want to create polls that are around what you do, and it could be like for me, marketing and working with ISVs. But again, you want to like kind of drip in other ones that are fun too. I think I did who's going to win the Super Bowl? Who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl was another one. Another one I like to do is, are you going to a conference that I'll be at, so I can see who's actually going to be there? That's a really good one to do. So that way, if you get partners and customers saying, yes, I'll be there, you can reach out to them because you'll see who voted on LinkedIn, and then you can reach out to them. So that's a great way to kind of start the conversation with them for conferences too. So that's kind of different ways I like to use polls.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. And then in imagination, right? So in this particular slide, what we see happening around us, like I live in the Seattle area. So for me, Amazon is my local business, but they just happen to be a behemoth of a local business. And we've all heard the stories about how does the small business compete with a giant like Amazon. And I have run into this actually in our ERP ecosystem, where customers, client partners have come to me and said, we want to be like those guys. And I'm like, why? Why do you want to be like those guys? Because what I see on my side of the house is all the customers who flee those big companies because they want the personal service that the smaller partner provides, right? So that is a lesson learned and a story I tell all the time. So the example here, we can go to Amazon and buy anything you want. But what GoPro did to compete with Amazon, they didn't want to sell their product through there, is on their website, what they did is they encourage more of the social interaction from their customers, where customers can share live footage of their GoPro experiences. And so they've developed their website into this property that has a lot of customer engagement on it, and it drives loyalty with them. And then you're not stuck in that conundrum, like the race to the bottom, the cheapest price, the fastest delivery. So thinking like, how might you compete in a competitive environment with partners who look a lot like you? And with Google search, for example, is in those very personal engagements that you can deliver and experiences that you can deliver via your website and also via your customer engagement process. Another thing you can do is think about a theme. So this particular example comes from Cisco. There's never been a better time to. And so what they did is they took all their customer stories and combined them under a theme with the tagline, it's never been a better time to, where they could show the impact their products were happening in smart cities and with conservation efforts. So you can take multiple seemingly disparate stories and unite them under using this type of theme. And then another one is actually from Dassault. So Dassault Systems, they make 3D experience software, CAD, that type of stuff. And what they want to do with a particular project before they could execute it in the real world is, and this particular project was called ITER, ITER. They brought together 35 countries to build the world's largest fusion device. And by building that, they were able to demonstrate the scientific and technical feasibility of fusion power as an energy source. So now you think about how complex that is. Like, how do you simplify something like that and make it catchy? And they came up with this notion of putting the sun in a box, because it makes you think about how on earth do you put a sun in the box? But underneath that campaign, they included all its elements. There were case studies, webinars, customer videos, and news reports, and something really compelling to grab the attention of the audience they were trying to reach, and then drew them deeper into the story. So I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Where to use your stories, right? So this almost needs to happen right at the beginning, but we put it at the end because once you think about what stories you might tell, you really need to think about, well, where you're going to put these stories. And a distribution plan is important for all the content that we build, but especially for a big investment like building your story is how do you package it and where do you put it so you can reach the biggest the audience possible. So really thinking through the elements of how do I get this to market at the very beginning will allow you to really plan for the type of media you need. And that is the point of this slide. So if for example, your story is a traditional case study, can you pull out a quote and put it in an email campaign? Could you make a social media card out of that? Can you build a series of emails so your story continues to build? And then if you're going to do a webinar, who is the customer you might invite to participate with you and help tell their story? Or if you want to try something different like dimensional mail, much like that cookie, how the cookie got to the end customer, think through what that dimensional mail might look like. And then, could you send a sample to your top 100 prospects with that printed story? Or if you have a strong LinkedIn presence and a great following, how can you drip out pieces of that story in a series of posts or even a carousel ad? And then if you're wanting to use it for prospecting, how do you break that into a series of assets that you can use either via email campaign, or if you have somebody who's calling into current customers that you're trying to upsell or cross-sell, how might you tee that person up with the appropriate assets that they need to do their job? So in conclusion, just a note is, it's about the stories you tell. I think most of us are familiar with Seth Godin. And so with that, I want to open it up. Amy, if anybody has any questions or stories they would like to share, I think this is an opportunity I would love for people to.
Yes, and I think stories are so powerful, and I really want us to, think about it from a webinar standpoint, because that's what a lot of us do jointly here in the ISV Society, is we do these joint webinars. And like you started off with a powerful story, right? And everybody, I believe, on this call will remember that story, because I know I will. So I really want us to start thinking about, when we start doing these joint webinars, how we can incorporate stories and have like a story maybe even flow through the webinar as we're doing the presentation, and how we can link each other's solutions and how they work together and what problem they solve and what pain points they help and so forth. So yeah. So anybody want to share a story, or when you did use a story or anything like that? I also like dimensional marketing. I feel like that's very powerful too, if you have the budget.
Yeah. I was just saying,
sometimes it can be inexpensive, depending on what you're trying to do. Like if it's your top 10 prospects, obviously that's a lot cheaper, more cost effective than your top 100. But I did I'm trying to find it. So I don't know if anybody follows subjectline.com, but Jay Schwedelson is very prominent on LinkedIn for email marketing. He has a free event every year, email event called Guru event conference. So the first, 100 that sign up for the event get something in the mail. So it was this, probably can't see it, but basically it's a a marketing calendar, and he outlines what the best days are to send out emails and the worst days every month and neutral days. So they sent that in the mail. So I think that's very
I got
powerful.
one of those and it's great. And I think it also covers like B2B versus B2C,
Yep.
so it's pretty, it's just a nice, pleasant reminder for you saying, what day
Right.
is it today? You got to think in calendar terms when you're communicating to broad audiences. You really have to think in the position of what is happening in the world, or in your audience space. Years ago, I was headed to an event in Louisiana and Katrina hit. And we weren't that, it's a global company at the time. So I had to do a full stop on what communications were coming out from other countries because it was very insensitive to the audience, what our potential customers and prospects and existing customers, what they were going through in Louisiana at that time. So, I was not popular for pulling the plug on like very expensive campaigns, but I wasn't going to risk alienating and ruining our reputation because we wanted to get, more leads in the door or more clicks or whatever. It just came across very insensitive. Meet us at so-and-so or join us at this event, it's like, no, we're not doing this.
Yep. Smart move.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Anybody else want to share a story or ideas or questions?
We've done some shared testimonials with mutual ISVs, people that have mutual customers with us, Repay Maureen's organization being one of them. And that's always been really good to have the customer share their point of view. I mean, I know that's obviously for most of us our most powerful storytelling, but it was nice to get a few different ideas because I think that's like our go-to. So it's nice to have a couple of ideas.
Megan, I thought of you about the cookie and the shipping thing. You could kind of talk about shipping.
Yes.
How
everything can circle back to shipping.
Exactly.
Yep. The cookies would be stale if you didn't have our shipping tool. Well, that would be fun. You could send somebody a bunch of stale cookies. That's what happens when you don't use the right tool.
Exactly. The cookie's gonna be
like
spoiled.
I like that. Create a campaign around stale cookies or chips or crisps or something, and
or they're all like in a crumpled mess and you can't even eat them.
No.
Broken teeth, dental bills.
Yeah.
It'd be fun.
Yeah. Anyone else? As we wrap up for today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining. Thank you, everybody, for being on. Thank you, Cheryl, for presenting, because we all know how powerful stories can be. So,
oh yeah,
and I feel like we sometimes, like you said, lose our way in the storytelling, where we are, or we just don't know what stories to tell. Like, I don't know what to share, or where do I start, or how,
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes coming back to your own personal stories, you're like, oh, yeah, I could kind of reframe things a little differently. I think it just, it's sparking the ideas.
And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out story either. It can be a simple couple of sentences that's just can be just so powerful.
Correct.
So, all right.
Thank you, Amy and Cheryl, for the great session today. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yes, and I will share this
Thanks,
recording.
you guys.
Thanks, Subin. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Cheryl. Appreciate it so much. I'll share all this information with everybody. So, and if you want to reach out to Cheryl or the Partner Marketing Group, they also provide some great marketing services too.
Super.
Thank
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.